Welcome to Sustainable Forces, Arup's podcast about people joining forces for the planet. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Dickinson, and we are here at Arup's Sydney offices today. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land in which we meet today, the Gadigal people, and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nation peoples from where you are listening to today. So when you think of high-speed rail, your mind might think of maybe Japan and a Shinkansen, or maybe the France's TGV, or the futuristic comfort of China's expanding bullet train network. High-speed rail is transforming how people travel globally, connecting cities, making them connect faster, reducing carbon emissions, and redefining the daily commute. And now, high-speed rail apparently is moving from a dream to a reality in Australia. So joining me to talk about this is Tim Parker, who is the CEO of High Speed Rail Authority in Australia, and TC Chu, who is Arup's Managing Director for the Asia Pacific region, to discuss how can high-speed rail reshape our future and what actually will it take to make that future happen. So thank you both for joining me today. Before we get started, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, where you're from, and what your background is?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer by training. I left England in 1986 for 3 months. I never went back to work in England. I worked for a consultancy at the time, and they said, can you go to Hong Kong for 3 months? I ended up working on a big infrastructure project called the Eastern Harbour Crossing, and then I was hooked. I came down to Sydney for 3 days and spent 2.5 years here, another consulting company, and worked on the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, which was fantastic. Back to Hong Kong to do airport, and then I migrated to Australia in '98. Since here, I've been doing mainly airports, railways, and road tunnels. Okay. And I'm now the CEO of High Speed Rail, having just come off 9 years on Sydney Metro. And yes, trains, planes, and automobiles is my career.
Perfect. Thank you. Keeping a theme. And TC, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on our podcast. And also, congratulations on your new role as Arup's Managing Director for the Asia Pacific region.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about this new role and also a little bit about your background and how you got here.
And thank you. I'm also an engineer by training, born in Malaysia, educated in England, and decided I love England so much that I will start my career from there. 10 years on, took me to my first major railway construction program in Singapore, returned 6 years later to actually work on the Jubilee Line extension project in London, and then returned back to Singapore to help them with the expansion program on railway, and then returned back to London to work on the renewal of all the old infrastructure asset. And a call from Hong Kong took me to Hong Kong to build the high-speed rail in Hong Kong and some of the suburban railway. Finished that, joined a construction company called Samsung Construction Trading, and learned a lot about tall building construction principle and how to achieve that. Returned back to UK to join Arup and as a global rail business leader. And beginning of this year, I was fortunate enough to be appointed to lead the Asia Pacific new region, combining from the former Australasia and the East Asia region.
Amazing. So much depth of experience here. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm imagining it's 2050. Here I am living in Sydney, but maybe not. Maybe I'm just working in Sydney. And thanks to this amazing new high-speed rail, I can now live far away, have lots of land, have that countryside dream I've always hoped of, and still be able to commute into the city. That's the dream, right? That's what we all want to do. We know there's a housing crisis happening. So you've both worked on big rail projects around the world, and you have seen the positive impact that they can have. In your opinion, how could high-speed rail actually help to shape a better future here in Australia?
Look, I think, you mind if I kick off?
No, Tim.
It's a problem. It's a wicked little problem, because I think Australia is one of the best places in the world to live. But we do have enormous cities, and our cities are getting bigger and bigger. But when you get out of the city, it's just land, and it's good land. And I was talking to a friend of mine who works in Milan. He lives the dream. He raises his family, lives outside of Milan, about 45 minutes on high-speed rail. I said to him, well, why don't you live in Milan? He said, well, in Milan I could buy a 2-bedroom flat, and in the region I have a lovely lifestyle. I've got land, I've got chickens, I don't know about the chickens, but he says he really enjoys it. So he said that the Italians, since they've got high speed, have fallen in love with it. And the same conversation happens in France and also Spain. France, it's fascinating, they've just put a line to the Bordeaux region, and it's 2 hours from Paris to Bordeaux. Imagine Australia going up to the Hunter. You're up to the Hunter in about an hour. Nice spot of lunch, then back on the train. You're not going down the M1 or stuck on the slow-moving train. You've got things like wireless connectivity and that sort of thing. And I think one of the things I think is fascinating is we were never going to do flexible working without COVID. So COVID was awful. But the one good thing about it is we had to work out how to do flexible working. So imagine now you hop on the train and that's when your working day starts, rather than when you get in the office and unpack everything. So I think it'd be a really bright future for us.
I like that. Although I did notice that most of your bright futures involved wine regions. So TC.
Well, I have to say, Newcastle, which I'm discovering a lot of because it's where it is, has 8 beaches. Okay. 8 beaches, 8 surfing beaches. So, but yeah, no, the wine is in there somewhere.
TC, other than wine and surfing, what other things can we think about for a better future?
I was going to touch on wine and surfing as well, but no, I think if you imagine the potential of development, and we can't avoid urbanization process because urbanization is going to happen. The key question is how we create that connectivity to facilitate mobility of masses of people traveling around, and the opportunity to create. And I will home in on the short stretch of high-speed rail from Hong Kong into Shenzhen, linking. But if you see the connection, Hong Kong has a population of about 9 million people. Right? But then connected to the Pearl River Delta region, you are tapping on 80 million. And you can just imagine that from Guangzhou, now will take you probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours to actually on the slow train down. But with the high-speed rail, you're less than an hour away. So on a Friday evening, you can finish work at 5, catch on the train, be in Hong Kong for 6:15, go in for a meal, go to a theatre, some nice theatre, in Hong Kong, finish by 10:30, be home in time for bed before midnight. That opportunity, that connection, that creation of that opportunity connection is significant. And you can see it visibly now. And you look at France, for example, France high-speed rail, back to food again. The connection, the high-speed rail connection between Paris and Lyon. And Lyon suddenly become the food city of France. Is that people can actually travel there, have a meal, and be returned back to Paris and have a jolly good time. And these are something that we mustn't forget. And even in the UK, it's not high speed. You look at the existing Eurostar network, the opportunity created to actually allow housing development and allow development of industry and workplace for people, and the journey time saving opportunity is significant.
Amazing. So we've talked about all these beautiful exotic places with great food, but let's talk now about Australia. We know that high-speed rail is gaining momentum here, and the first stage to link Newcastle and Sydney in New South Wales is coming. So in your view, what is that context like from an Australian perspective? What things could it help us to address here in Australia?
So I think, well, obviously I've got a slight advantage having just done a business case on this, but it's a really interesting corridor. Currently there is just under 15 million passengers a year use the existing railway, and it takes them 2.5 hours. And I said that in Newcastle, and out of the back came a guy and said, if you're lucky. Because invariably it's not. It's the only train service I've heard that they rejoice when there's a bus replacement service because they can get to Sydney quicker. You've also got the M1, which goes through really tricky terrain. And unfortunately, everyone's got an M1 story, but none of them are good stories. All about being stuck and that. So there's a real need to improve that. And Newcastle's our second largest city in the state. And then you've got the Hunter region, and it's not all about wine, but there is wine there. But you've also got a lot of mining, but you've got a real rich regional economic activity there. And I think often people think of high speed to bring people into Sydney, particularly if you live in Sydney, because we're very Sydney-centric here. You wouldn't be surprised to hear. But what we've seen overseas in places like Germany, that's the initial thing that happens, is that people come in, they commute in. What happens within a very short time, businesses say, well, why are we having our business in Sydney when we could have it in the region? And you actually get the reverse. You get people developing in the region and people coming from Sydney, and a lot of the people living in the region. And I think Leipzig was a great example in Germany. It's about 70 minutes by high speed outside of Berlin. BMW went there, Amazon, a whole bunch of businesses there. So I think it really will encourage us to think Sydney's a great city, but the opportunities in the regions are huge.
Yeah. TC?
Well, I think, you have a jolly good example, and then Tim was involved in the development of the Sydney metro system. And that short distance connection between, the northwest and down to the city centre is a clear example of how rail transportation open up the opportunity for urban mobility. And I think high-speed rail create an opportunity for future long-term connection between city to city, which is fundamental to continuous economic growth. And I certainly see that, tapping on Newcastle to Sydney as a starting point to create the imagination that eventually you have the East Coast connection all the way from the north to the south to Melbourne. That is outstandingly important to the future growth of Australia, in my opinion. And I think that this connection is just the beginning of a journey. Citing one, for example, you look at now the newest high-speed rail in Indonesia called Wush, which is connecting Jakarta to Bandung. And they are talking now about connecting to Surabaya, another 200, 300 kilometers. And the transformation effect, that open up the opportunity for city folks who want to get back to Bandung for the weekend to see a relative and family. And that connection between Newcastle and Sydney becomes such a short period of time, short journey time compared to currently, a couple of hours journey time?
2.5.
3, yeah, there you go. So I think that time saving, open up opportunity, family connection, friend connection, business connection. Fantastic value.
Okay, so I'm convinced. Good. So it's easy, right? So let's talk about why it's not rolling out so quickly. So what are the hurdles? What are the challenges when it comes to high-speed rail?
Well, we've only been looking at it for 40 years, so let's we don't want to rush into these things. Look, first of all, these are expensive lines. Projects in Australia are expensive, and we've got labour costs, we've got material costs, and we've also got some real challenges. So you've got to be a believer, because there's always, from government's point of view, there's always other priorities. And so, and part of the conversation is, you can get a really good project. You can say economically this is really viable, but it doesn't mean to say it will go ahead. What it means is that you've still got to get the support of the population. And I think for Australia, it's about really having a think about where does it want to be in 2050. We have an electoral cycle of 3 years. Actually, we need someone to think about, well, I'm looking around the room, we've got a younger generation here. We've got to be thinking about that generation. Where do we want to be in 2050? Environmentally, where do we want to be? Do we still want to be running up and down the M1 with the increasing numbers of accidents? And I think it's about thinking about a settlement pattern. If you look at Australia, the settlement pattern has been people come here, go to Sydney, or they go to Melbourne, and Sydney is huge. Just keeps expanding. And then you look at places along, say, Central Coast, between there, from a lifestyle point of view, can offer a lot more. But to do that, it's got to be connected. And I think we need a bit more long-term thinking. And yes, these big infrastructure projects are expensive, but so are houses in Sydney. And so we've just got to agree that we're going to invest. It's going to take us some time to pay it off, but this infrastructure is 100 years or more. And I think there's a great example a few years ago about Sydney Harbour Bridge. And what they did is they looked at it and they said, what would Sydney Harbour Bridge look like if we applied it as a PPP? And I think it was 4 lanes and a railway. That would have been it. And it certainly wouldn't have had an arch. It would have been something much simpler and uglier. But we've got to think about, this is a 100-year investment, and I think also we can do our calculations for the business case. I really suspect, honestly, we're undercooking it. I think when people actually have the opportunity to use high speed, they'll go in their droves, and it will change how people think.
Yeah, TC, any hurdles that you think?
Well, I think high-speed rail or any railway infrastructure investment is a costly investment. And so sometimes it's useful to think it over as to the valuation of the investment. And I think Australia have reached a point now, those business cases are quite clear-cut. There are some significant benefit, not as Tim alluded, it's not just about economic, about social, about time saving, but there's also a lot of environmental improvement, enhancement that high-speed rail bring. The decarbonisation process offering is just significant. And then also understanding the climatic impact. We can't control what the world has been damaged by us human beings, but what we can do is to do something to improve on it. And imagine that, thousands and thousands of cars plying the motorway down, and that apart from safety and accident, I think the sheer relaxation allow a better quality of life and things like that are beginning to kick in. And I think people in Australia could usefully have that benefit of a better health and a better opportunity to actually have time to relax with family and time to relax to work and things like that. I think high-speed will offer all that opportunity.
So you've both mentioned environmental impact as a positive part of high-speed rail. Can you go a little bit deeper into that? So talk a little bit about decarbonisation, like what are we comparing? How are they powered? How does it work?
So it's powered by electric, and there's some work done in the UK, and there's a lovely graph, and it's the lowest form of energy or carbon emission per passenger. It's significantly less than aeroplanes, normal trains and that. So it's a very, very efficient. And I think the other thing about it is, I was talking to someone recently, a lawyer, who says we're really looking at our sustainability plan. He said, but we need to solve flights from Sydney to Melbourne because there really isn't a viable alternative. So if there was a viable alternative, I think we're seeing the trend in Europe. It's not just companies are recognising they have a responsibility, and they are saying to their people, if you've got to travel and there's a high-speed link, take the high-speed train. France has gone one step further and said, no domestic flights, please. That's very French. But we have the busiest corridor between Sydney and Melbourne. We have planes going in and out all day long, and part of it is because there isn't a competition. And we're looking at a train that could take you from CBD to CBD in 4 hours, in comfort, reliably. It would make a huge difference to the environment.
I think Tim alluded to, in terms of railway, carbon footprint per passenger. I mean, rail transportation by far is the lowest of all. There's no doubt, a question about it. But I think the process of even a modern electric train now are actually so optimized in energy consumption that it's significantly lower than any other form of transport. We can regenerate, we can return the energy and share that for other purposes, for cooling, for even use that energy for heating purposes in the winter month. So I think all that come together actually continue to demonstrate that high-speed rail actually offer one of the most efficient and most environmentally friendly form of transportation.
Now, you both have a huge background in all sorts of infrastructure and transport projects, and one of the things we like to talk about on this show is things that you've done, cool projects that have either changed the world or have a good story to them. And so can you share with us a little bit about, what you've learned along the way, or a cool project that you're like, yeah, this changed the world because?
Look, cool projects. It's so nice when you look back on your career and think, there's lots of cool projects. And I was thinking about Hong Kong Airport, and then I decided not to. I thought I'd talk about something more local. So I've been was involved in Sydney Metro from the very beginning. So sort of 2000, 2008. There's two of us trying to get this thing off the ground, myself and a guy called Rod Staples, basically busking around saying, we've got this idea. And I remember talking to a government official who said, so Tim, train every 2 minutes, 99% reliability without a driver. You're kidding me. You're kidding me. And we had the first attempt at Sydney Metro, and unfortunately it fell over. It didn't actually, the government cancelled it, so slightly different. But then then it came back, and I came back into the project. It's got going in 2011, I came back in 2015, and the first line opened in 2019. It went pretty well, but it was to the northwest. So it's almost like part of the population knew about it, but the general population, it didn't matter, didn't care. And then we extended it through the city. And I remember in the early days of pitching a metro, people would say, what's a metro? And I don't get why we need it. It won't be any better than the existing trains. And of course, we then produced the product. I don't know if you've been on it yet.
It's amazing. It's beautiful.
And we put a huge amount of effort in not only making sure we had world-class standards. We did have some world-class designers, credit to Arup for Martin Place amongst others. But we created something that is quite unique. And I think it's the first time I've ever been on an infrastructure project where you had a term Metromania. And it was fantastic because for not only did people use it, but people who'd never got public transport had heard about Metromania and thought, I better find out what this is about. And we had converts, people using the metro. And currently, I think it's doing about 250,000 passengers a day, which is 25% of the whole train travel in New South Wales. Quite incredible. Anyone that's tried to catch it during the peak will know exactly what I mean. And I can't wait for it to open between Sydenham and Bankstown. And again, everyone's kept quiet because everyone thinks it could fail, but I don't think it will. But that will be the longest GO4 above ground railway in the world, so driverless. It will also be the first GO4 connection of a 120-year-old railway on the surface. So, and if it works, this is me, I'm no longer there, I'm on the high speed, but it has curved platforms, it has mechanical gap fillers, it is complex. But when it works, they're very positive, it's going to be fantastic for the people down there. And again, all the people there that said, oh no, we're happy with our existing railway service, will come back and go, no, actually we quite like Metro. So I think for me, that's a wonderful project, really hard to deliver, really complex, but an absolute outcome for the city. And every day I drive, I give people directions just because I can. And, but no, it's a lovely project to work on.
Amazing. It is beautiful too. Thank you.
Yeah.
TC, favourite
Oh,
project?
there's really application of technology, whatever there is prevail to us, whether it's digital or not. There are tons of it to share, but one specific one which is, could be, I find the greatest of pleasure is that for many years when a train's, air-conditioned train, whether you have maximum passenger or minimum passenger, the air conditioner just school up cool air, unnecessary waste of energy. So the application and convincing people that putting some sensor to weigh and the weight of the train, so I mean the volume of passenger, to adjust the coolant and dynamically, that to me, in terms of the energy saving, is significant. In terms of protection or betterment of environment to avoid unnecessarily utilization of energy. That project always sit in my mind. That there are other experimentation. One put pressure plate on the fare gate. As you walk past it, you electrify, you energize.
Like a
and provide-
piezoelectric?
Yeah, piezoelectric, yeah. And those are the things that we experiment in MTR and say, the balance of investment and causation of step movement create that little step might be not so good for the older folks who have walking difficulty and things like that. So those are a number of good example of interesting project one do.
So a piezoelectric plate to power your own train.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, if you go to Hong Kong now, there are a number of stations where station entrances are full of solar panel, nicely, display to actually provide a carbon zero supply of lighting and necessary for escalator and things like that, because that combination of energy storage from the solar energy and the battery cell that provide that necessary energy level.
And I think that's so important, because often when we're taking public transport, you think about where you're going and you get on and you get off. You don't think about the importance of all the periphery that goes around it. So it's nice to know the secrets that are going on behind the scenes. Now, you're both here today because one of the things we talk about in this podcast is the power of partnership. And you two have worked together for a long time. You know each other very well. And what we've learned in this podcast is that you can't do things alone. You do things much better when you partner with people who are powerful and can do powerful things together. So, how has partnership played in your careers, in your success? How have you two worked together? And has it been helpful?
Look, I think it's so important. Our industry is a little bit strange. Our contractors build these huge projects, and invariably they make a 3% profit, and they take all this risk. What happens is when companies are losing money, they try and recoup that money, and so we unfortunately have a reputation in Australia as being the most litigious area to work. And people in England think, oh, we're litigious. They come to Australia and went, no, we're not. And I think as an industry we've got to change that. I mean, the idea that you've got to work as a team. You find that if you get the team working, and when I say team, it's everyone. It's the contractor, it's the designers, it's the client. What is the outcome we're trying to achieve? And that is so important, but also relationships. People, most engineers I know don't come to work to become a lawyer or a defendant. So we've got to try and create an atmosphere where the reason I took up engineering was I thought it'd be really good fun, and it has proven to be really good fun. And I think we've got to encourage that. And I love working with like-minded people. And when you get people thinking together, you get extraordinary outcomes. I mean, I use Sydney Metro or even Hong Kong Airport as an example. We had extraordinary outcomes with that project because everyone worked together. Occasional disagreement, but generally everyone worked together. But everyone was focused on creating a world-class outcome and also getting delivered on time. And I think we've got to move our industry back to that, especially for the young people that joined our industry. Put some fun back in it, because engineering and building is actually a great thing. You look out there, it's fantastic, but it shouldn't be as hard as it is at the moment.
Interesting. TC, power of partnership. Have you had any fun partnerships working together? Has it been better?
I think it's essential. I think it's essential that we have that collaboration and partnership spirit. Being a client previously, and most of the contractor or consultant would say that I practice a very collaborative and partnership understanding approach to achieve the entity. But what is important, I think sometimes when we approach, we always think that, oh, he's bringing a lawyer with him, that means that I got to be a little bit more defensive and protective. But I think that if we practice the principle of think win-win, if you just think about win-win, not necessarily achieving it, just think about win-win, it will change your approach to dealing with matters. As a country, if you look at Spain, why in Spain they can suddenly deliver their infrastructure project at such a reasonable cost base, and yet consultant, contractors and clients feel that they are getting reasonable return on their investment. It's because they collaborate. For the good of the nation, they decided we got to bury our hatches and deliver them. And you know that now in Spain, it's the second largest high-speed rail link in the world. And their cost base, if you look very carefully, it is in the public domain, and you look at it, it says, wow, how do they deliver that? And that is through simply collaboration, partnership with all stakeholders who wants the common good for the country. So I think that in Australia, we are now approaching a different level and stage of nation building, and I think both all stakeholders, including clients and contractors and consultants, should work in partnership to deliver the high-speed rail for Tim.
I love that. Thank
All
you.
for Tim. We're on your team, Tim. Look, we're almost out of time, but before we finish, I'd love to leave our listeners with a few insights. So if anybody is listening and they're working on, or maybe aspiring engineers who want to work on high-speed rail projects, wherever they are in the world, or maybe they're planning to move into this space, what's one little bit of wisdom or advice you would like to share with them? Something you might have learned along the way.
When I first went to Hong Kong's motto at the time was to build the second best railway in the world. In other words, by all means look at innovation, but tried and trusted. On a personal basis, my career I followed projects, not companies or organisations. So, and it didn't matter how I got to work on certain projects. I just kept saying, how can I get to work on that? So, I think engineers are great. We want innovative thinking, but also to try and find out what's going on around the world. Sometimes I find, particularly in the rail industry, we're very slow to embrace, but we should be more open. And I think there's a great opportunity for engineers to bring skills from other parts of the engineering world and apply it to high speed. The fact is, you don't have to have done 23 years work on railways. A good idea is a good idea. I don't mind where it comes from. So that'd be my advice.
Amazing.
From my perspective, and I really not trying to sell Arup in that respect, because we promote the idea of total engineering. And when you talk about total engineering to the young aspiring engineer, entering the engineering field, you have a chance to be all kind of different discipline of engineering, and you master those skills, you become much more valuable. And the industry now, because of technology changes, offer you that opportunity. If you are interested in digital, the application of digital technology into the hardcore construction field is significant. It's not small amount. And I know that Tim, in his promotion of looking at cost efficiency, even talk about modularization in construction. That modularization in construction needs a lot of very skillful digital, computer-aided design principle into it. And if you have that kind of interest, it plays a part in it. Or if you prefer to do something much more challenging on the ground, even the geotechnical approach of ground engineering, there are significant sensors requirement to allow you to track and monitor. So I think that we are at a crossroad where I think young engineer or young aspiring engineer, the opportunity for you to learn and help your city or your nation to build a longer term future for the future generation is, unimaginable.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. It's been really insightful to not only see how Australia is taking huge steps in high-speed rail, and Tim, thank you for consistently pushing that through and having the vision. And it's not just about tracks and lines and getting places, it's about bringing people together, it's about having shared experiences, it's about connecting with family, it's about doing what humans do well and remembering our human state, which is so important, while also being great or much better for the planet. So that is always a positive. Next episode, we are going to head to New Zealand, where we are going to talk to Peter Reedy, who is the CEO of Kiwi Rail, and also we're going to talk to Mayuri Gunatilaka, who is at Arup, and we're also going to be talking about trains and how you can build climate resilience in railways. So if you like this, please subscribe on all of your favourite streaming services. We are Sustainable Forces. Subscribe today.